Jake Turner had never been the kind of man who gave up easy. Once he'd worked in top-tier garages, wrenching for semi-pro racing teams across the southeast. But after a workplace accident shattered his leg and drained his savings during recovery, everything slipped away: his job, his home, even most of his tools. Now, years later, Jake found himself scraping by as a part-time oil change tech at a rundown auto shop in Charlotte, North Carolina. Most of his evenings were spent in a small rented garage behind an abandoned tire store, working on something everyone else thought was crazy. What he was building wasn't pretty. At first glance, it looked like a pile of rusted metal, mismatched pipes, and parts that should have stayed in the junkyard. But to Jake, it was a second chance. Piece by piece, he was assembling a fully functional high-performance engine built entirely from scrap. He called it Project Redemption. Every bolt, piston, and gasket had been salvaged. Some he found at junkyards, others in scrap heaps behind auto shops, and more than a few were donated by mechanics who thought he was wasting his time. Jake cleaned each part by hand, tested them on makeshift rigs, and reassembled them with surgical precision. His tiny garage didn't even have a hydraulic lift, just an old jack and a few cracked floor mats. But what it did have was heart, and that was something Jake had in spades. He'd been working on the engine for 6 months. Some nights, the Carolina air was so thick with humidity it made his tools slip from his fingers. Other times, frost crept in through the garage's dented door and froze his breath. Still, Jake never missed a night. He worked with the radio off, with the silence helping him think, each click of the wrench echoing off the concrete walls like a countdown. People in the neighborhood started calling him Crazy Jake. Some walked by the garage just to peek in and laugh at the heap of parts. Others told him he was wasting what little life he had left. But Jake wasn't doing this for them. He was doing it for the man he used to be, and maybe, just maybe, for the man he could become again. One Thursday evening, something changed. After hours of adjusting valve timing and recalibrating the fuel mix, Jake wiped his hands on a rag and stared down at the Frankenstein engine he'd built. He turned the key. For a moment, nothing. Then with a sputter, a deep mechanical growl filled the garage. The engine didn't just start. It roared to life with a sound that seemed to shake the floor. Jake's eyes went wide. He'd heard performance engines in his career, but this was raw, unfiltered power, pulled from junk and sculpted by obsession. He let it idle, then revved it. The vibrations traveled through the concrete and out into the night. Within minutes, people began gathering outside, drawn by the sound. Neighbors who'd spent months mocking him now stood silent, staring in disbelief. Someone pulled out a phone and started filming. Jake didn't even notice. He was too lost in the sound, the pulse of something alive that he'd built with his bare hands. "Is that running on junk?" someone whispered. Jake didn't say anything. He just smiled, hands black with grease, eyes shining. By the time he shut the engine off, half the block had come out to see what was going on. Jake opened the hood and stood back, letting them see the truth. This wasn't some illusion. This was real. His engine, built from discarded parts and broken dreams, had come to life. He didn't know that the video someone posted would be shared thousands of times overnight. He didn't know that across the state, a NASCAR team owner named Rick Stanton would stumble upon it while scrolling through racing forums. And he certainly didn't know that less than 24 hours later, his life would change forever. But for that one night, Jake stood in his tiny garage, listening to the echo of what he'd built, knowing deep down that something had shifted. People had laughed at him for trying. But now, they couldn't stop watching. The next morning, Jake was still wiping soot and grease off his hands when a blacked-out SUV rolled up outside the garage. It wasn't the kind of vehicle you usually saw on this street, and certainly not stopping in front of his dusty, beat-up shop. The window rolled down slowly. "You Jake Turner?" asked the man inside, his voice calm but firm. Jake squinted through the sunlight. "Yeah, that's me." The door opened, and out stepped a tall man in a pressed polo with the logo of Stanton Performance Racing, a name Jake knew well. Rick Stanton wasn't just any NASCAR team owner, he was a legend. A guy who'd won Daytona, built multiple championship rosters, and was known for discovering mechanical talent in the unlikeliest places. But Jake never imagined Rick would show up here. Not on this cracked pavement, not in front of his pile of parts garage. "I saw the video," Rick said, looking toward the engine bay. "That thing really run like they say?" Jake nodded, still unsure if he was dreaming. "You want to hear it?" Rick smiled. "That's why I'm here." Jake moved like clockwork, flipping switches, pressing the ignition. The custom-built engine came to life with the same growl it had the night before, but now it sounded even louder under the morning sun, more authoritative, like it knew who was listening. Rick stepped forward and leaned in, eyes scanning every inch of the build. He didn't say anything for a full 5 minutes, just listened, watched. "You built this from scrap?" he finally asked, raising an eyebrow. "Every piece," Jake replied. "Mostly junkyard parts, some thrown-away race components I remachined." Rick nodded slowly. "I've seen a lot of engines, never heard anything quite like this." Jake waited, unsure where this was going. Rick continued, "You ever thought about working on the real thing, pro level? I've got a team always experimenting with engine prototypes. They've been stuck for months trying to reduce weight without sacrificing torque. You might have cracked something here." Jake blinked, speechless. Rick looked around at the garage, the cracked floors, the rusting toolbox, the single dangling light bulb. "You did this without funding, without a crew, without even clean tools. That tells me you're not just a gearhead. You're a problem solver." Jake laughed nervously. "I mean, I've always loved figuring things out." Rick's face turned serious. "I'm not here to make small talk. I want you to come work with us, not some intern gig. A real engineering spot on my development team. You'd have a proper lab, full access to data, a crew that knows their stuff." Jake stood frozen. After years of being looked down on, mocked for chasing a dream and buried under bills, he was suddenly face to face with the opportunity of a lifetime. "I don't even have a resume," Jake said, almost apologetically. Rick chuckled. "This engine is your resume." Later that week, Jake stepped into the Stanton Performance Racing headquarters, an entirely different world from his little garage. Clean floors, state-of-the-art equipment, simulation labs. But the one thing they didn't have was the scrappy genius who'd turned junk into horsepower. Now they did. Within days, Jake's design was being studied, scanned, and tested by engineers who previously dismissed unconventional ideas. His methods, though unorthodox, had opened new pathways for engine efficiency. What began as a personal redemption project was now influencing NASCAR's next generation of builds. Word spread fast. Motorsport's blogs picked up the story. "From Junkyard to Pit Lane," one headline read, "the mechanic who built his future from scrap." Jake's story became an inspiration. Proof that brilliance doesn't always come with degrees or uniforms. Sometimes it comes with calloused hands and stubborn hope. Back in his old neighborhood, the garage sat quiet. The engine was gone, taken apart and studied by a full team. But the legend of Jake's trash rocket remained. Kids started visiting the garage wanting to learn. Local mechanics who once scoffed at him now referred to his build like it was folklore. Jake Turner didn't just build an engine. He rebuilt his life. From the shadows of obscurity to the heart of a racing empire, all it took was faith in broken parts and the fire to make them whole again.